I built a website and it started to snowball. We started to sell lots. We started to sell property. We ended up opening a real estate office.
There's people like yourself that visionaries would see, okay, this is developed. This is an opportunity.
We say no more often now to homeowners than before. We could be we could have 100 homes, but we say no a lot more now to homes, either homes that don't fit us or owners that don't fit us. Early on, take what you can get.
Maybe there's more of a push for grow at all costs.
The key is to hire a wonderful number two. I couldn't find that right person. That's why I was afraid to launch. I just was like, I've got to find this person. So how do we find it?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hospitality Edge podcast, where we bring together what we think are two sides of the same coin, real estate and hospitality. And today I'm here with a very special guest, Nicholas Halverson, owner at Osa Property Management in Costa Rica. How are you today, Nick?
Very good. Very good. How are you?
Doing great. Very excited about this conversation. I'd like to start with maybe just an understanding of your background. How do you end up in Costa Rica?
Sure. Well, the journey starts almost 20 years ago, 19 years ago. I was doing corporate work. I had finished my MBA and I was doing corporate work in one of the towers in downtown Minneapolis. And a friend at the time had asked to a group of guys to go down and buy some land in Costa Rica. And at the time I said, let's do it. So we went down and we ended up buying part of 750 acres in the mountains and jungles of Costa Rica with the idea of doing a development of which no one in the group had any experience doing, and which of course led to its own challenges. But very quickly we ended up purchasing another over 1,000 acres worth of land, of which I own 150 acres right now as of today, 20 years later, through all sorts of changes and everything else. But yeah, it was not a plan. I'd like to say I was smart enough to have this great grand plan and everything else. It started off as a passive investment, and now it is my career for almost 2 decades.
But tell me more about the timeline of, okay, you go
Sure.
down, you check out a place, you're like, okay, you're a group, right?
Yep.
Perfect. I'm going to invest. It's going to be some money put aside. That's it.
Yep.
To then setting shop down there, establishing a business down there.
Well,
How does that happen?
Yeah, so it quickly happened that, again, my former friend, so you can see how this is going to end, needed help with presentations and websites and all the stuff that I knew how to do, right? When I graduated from Cornell in the mid-90s, we had to hard code a website. So to be able to use website building software even 20 years ago was a lot easier. So and I made presentations, and as I've spoken at Burma events, and so we started doing some sales meetings, and I built a website, and it started to snowball. Like we started to sell lots, we started to sell property. We ended up opening a real estate office then. We had 3 offices and everything was, and we were continuing to purchase land. And then the financial crisis of the late aughts that hit the United States, hit Costa Rica more around 2009 to 2012. And right about that time, I discovered some accounting inconsistencies, we'll call them. And it was time the market was crashing. We shut down the real estate office and we split everything up. And at the same point, I had built a house in 2009. So I've been actually started in 2008 in Costa Rica. So in 2009, I was on Verbo with my house in Costa Rica. And that was my first step into the short-term rental world. I've had the Verbo account since 2009. And so I also, with that 150 acres, then I ended up with 150 acres and we built a couple other homes. And so I was managing those just with spreadsheets, and I think how everybody starts in this world, and starting small with about 5 homes. And then a couple neighbors started asking around, and I just couldn't find the right person. I really couldn't find the right person because again, I spend about half my time in the United States. So although I'm a permanent resident of Costa Rica, I still spend half my time in the United States. So I needed someone to make sure that the cleaners were showing up and maintenance was getting done and handling check-ins and all of that. Find the right person until about 2018. And when I was in a meeting for my development, and Abigail Vargas was working at the Water Commission, which is where the meeting was taking place, and discovered she spoke English and was professional and great customer service. And I ended up hiring her away. And we officially branded Osa Property Management. I branded, I believe, in 2017 or 18. And 2019 is our first where we opened an office. We started doing that.
Okay. And by the way, where does, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So right. So we're in Costa Rica. So we just started managing the house in Tarcales, which is just north of Jaco. It's an hour from the San Jose airport. Then we go down the coast, down the Pacific coast. So if you hear cities like Manuel Antonio, Dominical, Uvite, Ojochal, San Buenos, it's about a 2-hour geographic area, just straight down the coast.
Okay.
We manage about 50 homes.
50 homes. Wow. And by the way, quick question with regards to the name. Where does it come from? Where does the name come from?
Property management. Sure. So Osa is a region in Costa Rica. And for search engine optimization reasons, I wanted a name that had property management in it, but that's a lot of characters. So Osa is 3 characters. So that's why I chose it. And I did really plan. We've grown beyond the Osa region. I actually have a second name ready to go and launch, or not ready to launch yet, but just in case. So I could know. But Osa, it's built up well. The brand is well received, well recognized, and it's a region in Costa Rica.
Okay. Now, before we go into the specifics of how you grew the company, I just want to go back for a second and narrow it down in terms of the decision of you saying, I'm moving out of the US. I mean, right now you're saying you're spending half of your time in the US, half of your time in Costa Rica. But was there a time where you were spending most of your time in Costa Rica? If so, I just want to know, was that even a hard decision for you to make, or was it just a no-brainer? You were enjoying it so much, you saw that there was business opportunities with the website skills you had, all the things you started doing, where it was just like, oh, I just like spending more time here? Or was it a thoughtful decision of like, oh wow, I'm leaving my country for now, right, and setting up my life in this new place? What was that decision like?
Well, I'm actually still in the middle of it because I have my children are in the United States. So when they were a young age, I realized early on the opportunity, right? I mean, we're talking, remember, this is developing. We're still in an area of developing country, right? So we're 20 years ago, there wasn't stoplights, there weren't banks. The nearest bank was over an hour away. There was one gas station in a 2-hour radius. I mean, this is still really rural. So to be able to see an area that you knew was going to develop and it was safe to go to is really hard. It's very different than northern Costa Rica. Like Guanacaste is very, very different. And that's about a 4 to 6 hour drive away from our headquartered office, which is currently in Uvita, which will soon be changing. But so it was something that I just saw long term was very clear, just crystal clear to me of what was going to happen. And back then the coastal highway wasn't even completely paved. So once that last 30 miles of highway was paved, the whole market exploded. This was right during the crisis era. So it was very clear what was to happen. So there was a bunch of construction that started and stopped because of financing had fallen through for a lot of people. And then some local entrepreneurs came in and scooped up a bunch of commercial centers and really kept things funded and going. And today, as an example, there's a city called Uvita, which is UVIT. When my first visit there was one restaurant, one grocery store, and a bunch of cows. That was it. That was the top. And one gas station, cows, and a grocery store. And again, there was no cell phone signal. So you had to use payphones to communicate. So people used to have this unofficial rule of like, well, I have a phone call coming in at Don Israel's supermarket at 7:14 p.m. So you would get in line and wait for that phone call. And everybody that's what we were dealing with. So nowadays, of course, there's Starlink. Starlink launched last year, November. But basic fundamental challenges we still run into a lot. Internet service can be challenging. Before Starlink, that was still a challenge for a lot of our homes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think there's people that would look at that, right?
Yeah,
there's people that are going to look at that and are going to see just the lack of infrastructure and going to say, wow, this is crazy. I would never come here. And then there's people like yourself that visionaries would see, okay, this is developed. This is an opportunity, right? Rather than something to run away from. So where do you think that vision came from? What do you think allowed you to see things that way, like many other people would not have seen it?
I think my DNA is I'm an idea person, right? So I'm I'm an idea guy. I've been blessed to have great vision. My father was a very successful businessman, and I think that comes from him. And just very clear that when it's a good idea, and when the facts and the data support what's coming, like Costa Rica itself, the fundamentals are it's very safe. Life expectancy is longer than the United States. So even when we talk about all these infrastructural issues, they live longer than people in the United States. They're healthier. Why is that? Well, there's food. Anything grows there. Any sorts of fruit, vegetables, they just grow. Great healthcare, great pharmacy systems. So people are healthy and it's safe. They haven't had a military since 1947, 48. So you don't have to worry about a military coup. There isn't one. There's no military. So you start thinking about the fundamentals of that. Safety, like safety and food, like at its core, it's safe, beautiful beaches, wonderful people. I've traveled throughout Central America and I still find the Costa Ricans the most friendly and the most hospitable there are. Now, the challenges for people, to your point, I still like things in order and I like things done, but it took several years to just, as Americans, we push. We're a culture that pushes. We want it tomorrow. We want it now. We want it faster. We want it yesterday. Costa Rica doesn't work that way. And the country is not going to change just because you have a lot of money, because you have a big house, because you're a bigwig in the United States or Europe or wherever you're from. It doesn't matter. So that pushes some people away. Like they'll come down and they get flushed out because they just can't take the stress of it. No one's in a hurry. Now, with that said, when we hire people, we are very punctual. But dealing with the infrastructure, people like driver's licenses are challenging, right? They're hard to get. Very few females have them still, but we can get to that later for culture. But we provide transportation for all of our employees. A lot of them to work. So we have a meeting point. And then because of that, I have a dozen vehicles, 4 motorcycles. They're all just out. We have expectations. So when you work for Osa Property Management, you will be on time or you won't be with us for very long. So, but that's part of the training and onboarding we work is that. And when as an owner that are typically between 2,000 to 6,000 miles away, it's why we provide that service. We're in market. We can get things done faster than you can sitting in your house in France or Belgium or wherever you're out of. So, but it is a challenge and it's definitely not for everybody. It just isn't. And we're if we get a bad feeling talking to an owner that they're not going to be a good owner because they won't get it, we won't take on that house anymore.
And so let's talk a little bit about those fundamentals of building that team. Building a good team is hard enough anywhere in the world. If you are in your own country, like it's still hard. But I would say that doing so in a different culture could be even harder, right? Because of all of those differences of how people are used to doing things versus the new standards that you are trying to put in place. How did you approach that, and what do you think allowed you to build the culture and team that you have currently?
The key is to hire a wonderful number 2, which was Vargas, is again my general manager. She is the driving force of that, and it does oversees all hiring. When it becomes a certain level, then I'll get involved. So it all starts with her, and it all starts with getting that right person that has the same belief and the same morals, the same ethics, all of that. Without that, because I had tried it for almost 6-7 years, I couldn't find that right person. So that's why I was afraid to launch. I just was like, I've got to find this person. So how do we find it? We look for grit. We look for people that are problem solvers. So what does that mean? That means when Abigail started, she didn't have a driver's license. And I said, this was my first test I said, well, look, I'll pay for your driver's test. I'll pay for any training you need. And within 48 hours, she sent me a note and said, look, I've signed up for classes. I'm doing this and I'm going to need some taxis. I said, fine, I'll pay for that. People who are problem solvers and, like I said, grit, like just the grind. And that's what we look for. If you don't have it, you're not going to work. And look, we mishire probably just as often as everybody else, where they interview well. We think they're going to be great at their job. And if we find out that they don't, that it's too much complaining, it's too many excuses, we just won't put up with it, because there's plenty of great people that are looking for opportunities. So now that we have almost 30 employees, we get a lot of referrals from our current employees that, hey, I trust this person. The person at the hardware store would be great on our maintenance team. Let's go talk to them. So, and then trusting your people, right? So one thing, obviously, it's because I'm gone half the time in country, I can't get involved with all the nitty gritty, and I can't get involved with all. So to really empower our people to say, you make the decision and give them the opportunity to succeed and to fail, and then learn from the failure, right? If I'm empowering an employee or my head of construction to go interview somebody at the hardware store or talk to them, pull them off, talk to them, kind of do the first level of interviews, that empowers people to want to keep working there. Because again, from a cultural standpoint, most of the United States, we talk about think outside the box all the time, right? Whether you're an undergrad, high school, undergrad, grad school, whatever. Come up with creatives. Culture, Costa Rica isn't like that. It's stay in the lines, okay? So we have to try to ask the right questions and make sure we have the right referrals from people, and then just trust your people and understand, and there's going to be mistakes made. But I think that's why our team is so good and loyal. Like our employees generally won't leave us. If they do, they want to boomerang back. We just had that situation last week. We had an employee that left for greener pastures, and 6 months later, they're calling back and he wants back in. And we actually did back in because that grit was missing now that he left us. So it's interesting.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's hard to do, right? In terms of being able to gauge that intangible element of grit or
Yep.
proactiveness, etc. There's this saying you've probably heard that says that hiring is guessing and firing is knowing, right? And to a
Yeah.
point, it's true, right? You cannot know until you see them in action, but you are seeing some signs,
Yeah, well,
that
and
tell
the other
you.
thing we've done is we've had to adapt, right? So when it comes to cleaners, okay, that's a pretty, relatively speaking, that's easy to know if they're going to be good or not, right? So a lot of our our cleaners are hired based on referrals, and we bring them in. Sometimes we'll bring them in during the busy season as a trial to see if they work or work out. Maintenance is the same way. Shadow one of our maintenance crews and see if they work out, if they get along with people, right? So we're looking for both. We don't have our culture like written down, but you have to get along with people. We even on the management side, we've had to adjust. We've adjusted. We used to have a position that we wanted to have our property managers, or quote unquote title of the property manager, would be the expert top to bottom of every house and would be the point person for the owner. And what we found out was we were asking people to do too much. It was just becoming too much. And in our current location, our locations, that was tough to find. It was tough to find the people that had hospitality experience, the ability to learn, or the passion to learn. So we and the Cedar team have had to adjust what we do to make sure we're filling that in. So, and we still don't have it right. I don't think we have it perfect yet. So we're constantly discussing how are we going to staff? What's our next hire? What's that going to look like? What's this person going to do? And where are we going to put them in? Whether that's an admin, accounting, whatever it is, right? Because we're full service. We pay taxes. We pay every bill for our homeowners. By law, we have to file monthly filings, monthly taxes, tax returns for our homeowner. We have to do everything top to bottom to making sure the swimming pool is clean, making sure they're tax compliant. And oh, by the way, obviously my day-to-day stuff is with the owners and doing the marketing for the properties.
So let's talk about that piece, right? In terms of, if we go back to when you started out, first it was your property that you built, put it on Verbo. Then you started getting a couple of properties here. When you said, okay, this is a business, we're going to grow this, how did you go out and start finding homeowners, right? In the US, that might be easier. Maybe the records are available with I don't know, with the licenses, right? For tourism regulations or things of that nature, or maybe you can find it on an MLS platform or whatever. How did you go out and start finding homeowners to start adding to your portfolio?
I took the build it, they will come, because I saw the opportunity, and there is no MLS in Costa Rica. There is no tax base. Like, you can't go to the municipality and figure out who owns it, because generally the properties are owned by a corporation. And then you can drill down and find out who that is, but there's no contact information. So we don't even know what country they would be from, right? So we have owners from 5 different countries right now. So the traditional way of doing it yourself or hiring a company that can go and dig in and find all the owners of a specific property doesn't exist. So you just have to, it gets back to grit and grind. Like, you have to find ways. And so for us, it was online. It was talking to existing owners, talking to real estate agents, talking to anybody we could. So for us to build the Osa Property Management brand, I mean, anytime you see us at an event, we have our red shirts on. All our employees have to have uniforms. We provide those, of course. If the uniform is starting to look old or frayed, we give them a new one. So all of our vehicles are branded. So just getting the word out. For me, I'm long term. I think anybody who's in this business short term is wasting their time. And as a homeowner, I'd stay away from anyway. Right? So for us, I said, I own a 150-acre development that will, God willing, have 175 homes on it in the next 10 to 15 years. I'm not going anywhere. So I try not to get too high, too low with anybody, because we are not going anywhere. A lot of times, especially in our market, people will jump in. Well, our 95% of our competition is illegal, meaning that you're not allowed to work in Costa Rica as a foreigner, period, unless you're a permanent resident without restrictions, which I am. So from day one, we said we have to be compliant, 100% legal. And we actually see that with some of our other local competitors. Generally, someone will fly down and want to retire in Costa Rica. And, oh, by the way, I'm going to start this business. Well, you have to have an office. Well, everybody wants to work from home. Well, that's not a recognized business for property managers in Costa Rica. So for us, it's this constant reinvestment. So I take everything we make and I put it back into the company. My goal is to be 2 to 3 times the size we are now. But I want to do it the right way.
Okay.
So, and I think sometimes we talk to some of these other companies that they grow really quickly and we know they're making a lot of money, but their businesses I don't feel are really that stable. Whereas I would suggest our slow build and our slow focus and increasingly focus. We say no more often now to homeowners than before. We could have 100 homes, but we say no a lot more now to homes, to either homes that don't fit us or owners that don't fit us.
I think that approach.
How do you take what you can get? But
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that approach of growing sustainably makes so much sense when capital is cheap and it's easy to access and the market dynamics are different. Maybe there's more of a push for grow at all costs. What we're seeing right now is what that can result in, right? When you grow at all costs and you sacrifice solid unit economics, you sacrifice profitability, you sacrifice standards of quality, right? You sacrifice your team's well-being, right? Because yes, it might sound very fun to grow, but you're growing so fast that no one can keep up. You have very high turnover and people are burning out. Is that really success?
That's right. Yeah, and we've gone through some of those phases of really, we went from about 25 to 40 houses pretty quickly. I mean, in a matter of months. And we were taking on we never said no. So we were taking on homes that were good for us. But of course, the bad homes take just as much energy and time and generally more than the right homes. So that needs owners, and we lost some owners because of that. And that's our fault. That was a learning point for us to say, wait a minute, that was a good house. That's our fault. That was on us. Because as you grow, right, unless you have the right software, the right support system in place to scale that. And again, we're very hands-on, right? For us to get an air conditioning technician used to take 3 to 5 days. And even if they said they're coming on Wednesday, that might mean Friday. And when there's a 2 or 3 day rental, you can't wait 3 days. So it's why we've hired our own air conditioning and appliance technician. And we're actually starting to train a second one for that exact reason. So when a renter calls and says the air conditioner's broken or whatever, and again, there's a lot of power surges, which wreaks havoc on fuse boxes and motherboards. We can get somebody there of minutes or hours. So as you start scaling that, to your point, suddenly it's, oh my gosh, we need another technician. We need another this. We need another team of cleaners. But that's made us stronger. It's made us better and smarter to know what we want and what we stand for. And I think every company has to go through that period of where it's easy, and then you grow fast, which is great. And then you realize the administrative challenges that brings on. And that's why we're as confident now as we've ever been.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So going back to the whole concept of what allowed you to grow, right? So you said online, you said real estate agents. So what exactly did you do online that worked, or what's your number one source of new homeowners right now, let's say?
Referrals.
So it's referrals. Okay. And would you say that has been the case consistently throughout the years?
Yeah, pretty much. Referrals. I mean, obviously, and optimization is important, but it's a small community where we are. And we've learned real estate agents have not been good to us really, because real estate agents are paid to get a transaction done. And there's been a dozen times, probably more, where a new homeowner will come in and say, hey, our real estate agent said our house is ready to rent. It's ready to go. We could have it up by next week. You're a great company. Come take a look. And we walk through it and say, you're looking at tens of thousands of dollars of repairs. This house is not even close to ready. So it puts us in a challenging position, because a real estate agent suddenly say, well, wait a minute. And we don't want to sour a deal either, right? So it's why we have stayed out of real estate. We don't deal with it at all, because it's a conflict of interest as far as I'm concerned. Because for us, we will do inspections now. We do home inspections for potential buyers. We just had one this last week. So that's something we will do. Again, real estate agents won't hire us too much anymore, because we're honest. We will tell you what's wrong with the house. We will send the electrician. We will send the engineer. We're going to check everything. And in a growing real estate market, people don't want to be told that this beautiful looking house needs a bunch of work done on it. And unfortunately, that's pretty common. So for us, we've had to it goes back to the grind, right? We can't rely on anybody else except ourselves. So that's why we're very active in the community. We do what's right for the people of Costa Rica and for our employees. And I firmly believe that is the recipe for long-term success, is being who you are, true to yourself, treat your employees wonderfully, then treat the community you operate in wonderfully. That's why we pay our taxes. That's why we're registered with all the authorities. It's all the municipalities. We do everything by the book when our competitors don't. But then it puts us at a disadvantage from a cost standpoint. Our cost is higher, which again, it can be more expensive to our homeowners, but generally not always, especially today's world.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you hear this, let's say from the US, from Canada, you're thinking, well, of course you are above water, of course you pay taxes, of course. But then you, when you get into the Latin American community, you realize a lot of businesses are not necessarily above water in that sense. So it is competitive advantage in a way, right? To be above water because you are doing the right thing, and in the long run, that's going to pay off. In the long run, that's your reputation on the line. In the long run, you're going to attract the owners that you want, right? The owners that value things being done the right way. But you're right that it's in a way a challenge. From a cost perspective, you're paying more, right? From an exposure perspective, like I've heard of companies in Mexico and different places that say, oh, well, I'm doing everything by the book, contrary to my competition, and yet I'm the one that gets audited. My numbers get audited and not my competitors' numbers, because I'm showing more numbers than they are because I'm reporting everything, right? So it's interesting because it's doing the right thing even when the right thing is hard.
Yes. And we've, as recently as about 3 months ago, I walked through and met with an owner of a beautiful home right next to a gorgeous home that we manage. We wanted it. And he said, well, look, I don't pay taxes on it. I said, well, that's going to change. And he said, well, no, that's not going to change. I'm not going to pay taxes. I said, then we're walking away. Right. So the other thing with Costa Rica, and even though their infrastructure is behind, everything is online now. So everybody requires, so every bill we pay, it's called a factura electrónica. It's all that's tied to the tax authorities. So if we're collecting funds, we're declaring that. So we cannot and would not bring on those owners and to that person dealing with that in Mexico. Yeah, we know that. We're the largest property management company and vacation rental company in our region, in the areas so we know we're a big target, which makes us, we know the head of the labor department nearby, right? Because we meet with him when needed, just to make sure we're doing everything by the book. If we have to fire somebody or there's been an incident with 30 employees, things happen. So the other thing that is important is the municipality, to their credit, we operate in 4 municipalities now, but one of the municipalities has been very active in reaching out to us to say, help us understand who your competitors are who aren't registered with us, because we're not getting our taxes. So in a way, that's why we've always said we would rather have the whole, as a short-term rental industry, we owe it upon ourselves to make sure that at the very least, the businesses or the areas that we operate in, we're compliant with the existing laws and regulations. And by the way, those regulators may help us in the future if we're transparent with them now. Now, I know that can change, and I know city council meetings, I take the belief of if we're honest and transparent and helpful to the municipality, they're going to help us. So like I said, I was asking us for help to help identify companies that are operating under in their region without registration, because some municipalities are understaffed and they don't know what they don't know. And so again, and push in the Costa Rica market by the hotel industry to try to put increasing restrictions on short-term rentals. So as a short-term rental, as a participant in the short-term rental industry in Costa Rica, all of the property management companies need to come together and make sure we're doing things legally and by the book and paying taxes. Otherwise, the hotel industry, which is highly organized, as we've seen in whether it's in New York City or in Costa Rica, highly organized, well-funded, the world's largest hospitality brands are funding this and not happy that we're pulling away. And our advantage in our area, there's no major chain. The nearest chain from where my house is almost 3 hours away. But that's how rural this is. I mean, there isn't a low end, there's nothing. Now there's some high end resorts being built by the big guys, and that's going to change. Change regulations, we feel. So that's why we're trying to stay ahead of that and to work with anybody in the hospitality world. I'd rather work with than fight with, because because like Homes and Villas, like I can't remember her name. I apologize, but at the 2022 Verma event, she had said from Homes and Villas by Marriott that she was headed to a hotel conference after Verma and said that potentially in 15 years, we're going to have hospitality conferences. And it's going to be hotel operators. It's going to be vacation home rental, short-term rental, property management companies, because we're all dealing with the same thing, right? We're dealing with customers, dealing with soaps and towels and arrivals and emergency and everything else. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
the
that,
differences are being the two industries are becoming one. To your point, more and
yeah,
more as there's less of a difference in the standards of quality that you would expect at a vacation rental property versus in a hotel. Like if you're expecting the same level of quality, then what's the difference really, right? Other than perhaps some of the amenities and whatnot. Now, just want to point out something you said about if referrals are the number one source of business, of growth, that says a lot about the quality of the service you're offering. And I think I like this quote. I don't know where I heard it, but it was something like, you are only doing sales because you don't know how to do marketing, and you are only doing marketing because you don't know how to do product. So it's like, focus on the product, right? Focus on doing things right. Focus on the quality of the service, and
yep.
that will become your way of growing, right? So I think you are an example of that being the
Yeah.
case.
And I'm just thinking, I think about 15% of our homes that we manage are owned by people that rented from us first, that came down for vacation or came
Okay.
down on a real estate purchase, which again, we don't touch, connected back to us to say, oh, by the way, I rented a home from you. It was a wonderful experience. We now own in the country. Would you manage our home? How much does it cost? So that becomes this whole, again, it's the long-term approach, right? Taking care of every customer that comes into our homes, because you just don't know where that customer is going to be in 6 months or 6 years. But we want to make sure it's a great experience. And for us, it's part of this full cycle.
Now, in terms of homeowner selection, right? Being more selective with who you think is a right fit, both in terms of the owner and the property. What have you come to learn throughout the years that you do now but you were not doing before, as far as red flags that you hear today and you right away know, okay, this is a no-go, right? I mean, you mentioned the tax situation, but are there any other things like that? Because you mentioned that you have not necessarily grown the number of properties you manage versus maybe it's last year, but yet your revenue has gone up quite significantly. So what do you think has resulted in that?
We are just brutally honest. So I always tell our homeowners, look, the real estate agent, it's all about rainbows and butterflies. Everything's beautiful here. Everything's wonderful. Our job, we feel, or I feel, and this is what we push down for our culture, is 100% honesty. Just be brutally honest with them, because for time expectations, for experiences, for any challenges at the house, not to say like, look, if something breaks, we're going to go fix it anyway. I mean, it isn't to be negative. It's just to be transparent and honest. And from a homeowner selection, as I look back, if we have to chase a homeowner, if we really have to chase them, 8 out of 10 times that homeowner won't be with us for more than a year or two. So we've had to learn that once we make our proposal and once we introduce ourselves to them and we explain who we are, what we do, our advantages. Not to say I don't follow up every quarter or I put it in my CRM and I follow up and see how things are going. But in the past, we were more aggressive in chasing. And what we learned was that's not good for us, because again, we want quality homes. And a lot of times when you're chasing owners or convincing owners, if you have to convince an owner, we start running into red flags about delayed maintenance, right? That for us, because we're in the tropical area with the rainforest, with the animals, with the insects, we'll have 6 air conditioners break this year because geckos get fried on the motherboards. So you open up it's actually, there's like a body of the gecko. If they're not willing to get things fixed right away, obviously that's going to impact reviews, it impacts reservations. So for us to say, if you're going to start worrying about and telling us up front, so I guess the start listening to your homeowners. If they're like, look, I have to make money on this house. If I don't make money on this house, then I'm not going to make my bills. It's like, well, wait a minute. Have you ever owned in the tropics? Do you understand that the power grid's unstable? There's surges in the electrical grid, smart TVs, anything connected to the grid can get fried out at any given moment. Are you willing to reinvest as needed? So we're rarely big on, we have our standards. We are unforgiving on our safety standards. So we've had Justin Ford from Breezeway come down twice now and train us. And I was the first one to go through the first one in all of Costa Rica to be certified as completing his class. So we are unforgiving on safety. So we mandate fire extinguishers on every level, near the kitchen and by the grill outside, which, by the way, came in handy for a renter about a month ago when a grill started on fire. She put it out and sent us pictures, and we mandate the smoke detectors. We mandate the carbon monoxide is actually challenging for us because they don't sell them in Costa Rica. So we have to get owners to bring them down, and say swimming pool signs in Spanish and English. Those are not negotiable. If that becomes a sticking point for you as an owner, we'll push through and say, are you sure? And if they say, look, I don't want a swimming pool sign, or I don't want to spend the money on a fire extinguisher, we will close up and say, you're not right for us. We love your house. We love you. But look, getting back to the hospitality world we're in, we as an industry owe it to our guests to make sure that they arrive safely and they leave safely and have a wonderful time while they're here. And if an owner's going to go cheap, $100, or they don't like the way a fire extinguisher looks in their house, they're not ready for commercial activities because regulations are only going to get tougher. So for us, that's a filter. If you don't want to spend the money on safety, and we have a whole list. We also have a whole list of requirements that we cross-reference, right, with Airbnb, Vrbo, Booking, and special homes and villas, right? Making sure we have all the amenities that make sense for our area. And if you're not willing to listen to that, again, we don't want a long negotiation about why you need a rice cooker in Costa Rica. You just do, because up to 25% of our renters are Costa Rican and they expect a rice cooker. So if you're not willing to spend the $80 for a rice cooker, then you're not right for us, because again, we're bringing in renters. We want to make sure our renters have the best experience, and we know what they want, but both based on the data that the OTAs are giving us, as well as our own experience, local market data and experience. So it's a trust. This is a major trust thing, right? Our owners don't drive by and look at their houses, right? Which is great on one hand and not great on the other. So when they say, look, I was there 8 months ago and everything was fine, and now you're telling me the kitchen table needs a new leg, right? It's like, well, that was 8 months ago, right? So there's things like that. So for us, for the communication with the owner up front, we're getting, I think, a lot more efficient with our time and really, really pushing those potential owners to say, look, these are our expectations. I think in the past, we were just a little we wanted that contract signed, and we'd be a little more easygoing with, hey, we can work that out later. Let's work that. Now we say, look, this is what we require. And this is why. You have to give them the why. People are spending 6-7 figures on a home. They don't want to lose that home either, right? For a liability issue or things like that. So there are recommendations on the safety side, especially. Look, you don't want to end up in a Costa Rican court because somebody had a terrible accident at your property because you didn't want to put a red fire extinguisher in the hallway. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So for us to be able to do that, so anytime they say and if they want to get really, we don't co-host, we don't allow co-hosts. So we've lost some homes on that where they say, look, I'm experienced. And I'll co-host my house. This is my house. Absolutely, you're right, for sure. But we're not right for you then. Because the process is, we have our communication styles, we have our triggers and our emails and everything else. That's all tied into all of our tech stack, tied into our CRM, and you're not accessing our CRM. So that's another filter for us. If somebody says that, they're a no right away. So we started to add hard no's, like, this is a no, you're out. Doesn't mean that you won't come back later. We're not saying no because we don't like you. It's just that's a business model.
It's just yes if you accept all of this.
Yeah.
And to your point, sometimes when you're trying to just grow, going back to our previous conversation of the mindset of growth at all costs versus sustainable growth, you might be just putting those things for later, to your point, right? We'll address it later. We'll listen, let's get started and then we'll figure that out. But then it's like the fact that they were hesitant in the first place, that is the red flag. They won't change if they're difficult, or if they're being cheap about $100 sign when they're being onboarded. Imagine what they're going to be cheap about eventually when something happens, something breaks, something needs to be updated, regular wear and tear, especially in the tropical weather and whatnot.
That's right.
I think it's very good advice what you're saying of being very, very clear, almost doing the opposite of selling, right? Almost being like, these are all the reasons why you would not want to sign with us. Is there any of those that are a hard stopper for you? And if so, then let's put things on pause.
That's right. Because not asking that question or pushing that 5 to 15 minute conversation on the front end, to your point, if if you just ignore it and then you need to bring it up 3-4 months later into the relationship, it turns into a 3 or 4 month pain point for both of us and our parties. And you can see the writing on the wall at that point, right? They don't want to do the repair, or they don't want to put that in, or it's suddenly like, we should have just had this conversation early on. And if this was a deal breaker for you, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, that's okay. That's okay. Again, I'm long in the market. I'm not going anywhere. Your situation, and again, we manage, I think, 2 or 3 homes right now that were homes that we proposed to a year or 2 ago. And then they called us back and said, hey, we just had a terrible experience with them. We didn't go with you. We went with company XYZ. Now, could you please come back? We had one pretty much begging us. I mean, I said, look, our prices have changed, obviously, from a year or 2 ago. And it was almost, I don't care the price. I realize now what you were saying in the proposal, why you were charging what you were doing. So for us, that's an advantage, and it becomes a filter. So if you say no, or if you say no to us, or we say no to you, that doesn't mean the relationship's permanently blocked. It just is, as of today, it's not a good fit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. What about the profile of the owner in terms of whether they want to make money with their property, or they're just trying to have a place to cover costs and go to the place and visit every now and then? Do you have a preference? Do you have more of one versus the other? The one that sees their property as a business versus as a second home? What are your thoughts on that?
Here's what I'll tell you. Almost everybody says, I just want to break even. I would say 95% of our homeowners always say, as long as I break even, I'm okay. That's not true. They generally want to break even, and then they get into, well, why am I not making more money? What can I do for increased rental? Even if they're making significant money. So we just always assume, look, if you just want to break even, that's great for us to know, because I will write that down and confirm that in an email to you. So if it ever becomes an issue, we can say, look, we agreed on the front end, this was your goal. With that said, I would generally say almost all of our homes, they all generate very good revenue. The caveat to that is, if you're going to use your home during the high season, which for us is December to March, then you may not generate nearly as much, because we can generate, in some homes, we'll generate 80% of the revenue in those 4 months, right? So, and I know that's not unique to us, but other companies have they have narrow windows. But if you're going to use your home, which is your right, we have unlimited personal usage. Our owners can use their home as much as they want for free. It's their home. Just understand, obviously, we're keeping track of the number of days. And if you, on the end of the year, say, well, why didn't we generate more revenue? I'm going to pull up and say, well, look, you spent 112 days there, of which 74 were during the high season. Here's what here's the value of that personal stays were. So that's important for us. But for us, we do like the owners that say, let's maximize this, let's do that. But we're still selective in terms of, we don't fill a house just to fill a house, right? So it still has to be the right price.
Yeah.
Or the what will get on us too. And it doesn't make sense for us to go too cheap either.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's just interesting on the pricing flexibility side of things, how an owner would go about determining what a minimum price should be versus
We don't give up that anymore.
We don't let the owners have. Okay, that's a good one.
We used to, and they're based it entirely on emotion.
Exactly.
Because every conversation is, I think it's worth XYZ. Well,
or my neighbor, I saw a neighbor.
The neighbor always gets 5 times what you're charging, right? I mean, we actually had this situation happen where the neighbor was getting this high rate. What the owner didn't know is we managed his neighbor's house. We could use real data to say, no, you're wrong. So you're either making that up or your neighbor's lying. So anyway, or both. So we use data, right? We just say, look, we have a revenue manager who has 7 years in the industry. So, and this is, and I can share some of the, with our owners, I'll say, look, this is the data we're using. This is not a roll the dice and cross our fingers and hope this works. Our goal is to generate revenue. Our goal is to generate the most amount of revenue. That's what we want. We want to generate the highest revenue we can. It's in our best interest to do so. So we both want the same thing. But we will have discussions about minimums for sure. We'll have discussions on floor rates. We'll discuss that, but we ultimately control that also.
That makes sense. And I think that's great advice as well for anyone listening in terms of taking control of their rates and not letting the owner set those rates. Look, Nick, this went by super fast. I honestly could have continued here for the next 2 hours. I feel like we're going to have to do a second edition of the podcast because we didn't cover real estate. We didn't cover development projects. There's a lot for us to discuss still, but it was still very insightful. So knowing that you're planning on 2 or 3xing the size of the business in the coming years, I think we'll definitely set up a call here to do the second edition of the podcast, see where things are at, and I'll see you at one of the next conferences for sure. But thank you so much for taking the time and for sharing all of those insights.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Have a good one.
You too.